Rain fell in a steady, cold curtain over the merchant strip, drumming against tarpaulins and the cobbled stones beneath Rodney Stradd's boots. He kept his collar high, head lowered, as he always did on the walk home from the trade office. After 12 years on Verort, his path never changed. Past the repair yards with their hanging smell of machine oil, along the narrow lanes where ropes swayed from cargo cranes, and down to the strip that clung to the edge of the loading bays. His job logging manifests, checking cargo weights, catching small errors before they became fines, was steady, quiet, and unremarkable. It was exactly the sort of work he had chosen after the collapse of a freight company and a marriage. That had soured slowly, like fruit left too long in storage. He had come here for stability. He had found it. But stability, he'd learned, could also be a life so still that nothing new ever happened. Halfway down the strip, a flickering green-white neon sign cut through the hiss of rain. The bench beneath it was not selling tools or seals, and that alone made Rodney glance sideways. A squat merchant in an oilskin jacket sat there, water beating on his shoulders. Beside him stood a woman tall, barefoot, skin the shade of polished green stone, hair a deep violet that clung in wet strands to her shoulders. A thin silk wrap hung low at her hips, darkened and tightened by the rain, a halter across her chest tied carelessly. She stood as if the cold didn't touch her, as if she had chosen to stand in the open. She didn't belong here. Not because she was alien Verort's port, saw dozens of species, but because she was being displayed. Not sheltered, not seated, not offered any pretense of comfort. In this colony, such things happened quietly, out of view. This was different. The merchant leaned forward, catching Rodney's pause. "For a night human," he said, voice casual, like reciting a price for grain. Rodney kept his eyes on her face. She didn't look away, didn't plead. Her gaze was sharp, ringed gold and green, the kind a foreman used when judging if a worker could pull the next shift. He told himself to keep walking. He didn't stop for things like this. But he also didn't walk past someone standing in the rain without cover. "What's your name?" he asked. The merchant snorted. "Names cost more than ours." "I'm asking her," Rodney said. Voice was low but clear, not important. The words were deliberate, her accent faint and hard to place. She stood with her weight slightly forward, arms loose, ready to move if she needed to. Rodney's chest tightened. "How much?" The merchant named a price. It was steep for one night, but not enough to make him turn away. Rodney thought of the folded credits in his inner coat pocket, his reserve for emergencies. This counted. "Fine," he said, "but first one answer." The merchant rolled his eyes. "Always one who wants to talk first." "What are your rules?" Rodney asked her. She held his gaze. "No shouting, no locked doors, no taking without asking." He nodded once, agreed. She looked to the merchant. "He pays. I go." Rodney handed over the credits. The merchant counted them slowly, then waved her forward. She stepped to his side, slipping her hand lightly into the crook of his arm. Her skin was warm despite the rain. They walked. Rain splashed up from the stones, soaking the hem of her wrap. She matched his pace exactly, not looking around, not scanning for escape. It struck him she had already decided where the night would take her dot at his building. He keyed in the door code. The hall smelled faintly of boiled tea and old paint. Inside his apartment, she crossed the threshold without hesitation, leaving wet footprints on the wooden floor. Rodney closed the serrure. Door behind them, hearing the rain fade to a muted hiss against the window. Neither of them asked the other why they were here. But as she stood in his lamplight, calm and self-possessed, even in a borrowed space, Rodney knew one thing. Whatever this night became, it wouldn't be routine. Rodney set his keys in the bowl by the shelf and turned the lamp down until the room held a steady, soft light. The woman still unnamed stood just inside, eyes moving with quick, practiced precision. One room, one window, one interior door to the bathroom. No balcony. No second exit. She absorbed the layout in seconds, and then let her gaze settle back on him, waiting. She didn't ask where to stand. She didn't ask what to do. She simply waited to see if he would start giving orders. "There's a towel on the chair." He said, "Hot water works. Soap's in the bathroom." Nothing scented. His voice sounded stiffer than he intended, more like a foreman giving instructions than a man making an offer. "You can shower first or eat first," he added. "Your choice." Her eyes flicked to the towel, then to the kettle on the counter, then back to him. "Food first, washing after." "I don't like heat on an empty stomach." He nodded. "Tea, bread, fish. I could do rice, too. It takes 10 minutes. "Rice," she said, "and salt." Rodney moved to the counter and set water to boil. He measured rice by instinct, letting the grains fall into his palm before sliding them into the pot. He added a pinch of salt. The rhythm calmed him, the same way it always did. She drifted toward the window, opening it 2 fingers wide. Cold sea air pushed into the room. She didn't ask permission, only glanced at him, reading his reaction. When he said nothing, she nodded slightly, as if confirming something she'd suspected. "You asked for rules," she said. "I ask you now about safety." "Yes," Rodney replied, slicing fish into thin pieces. "I don't drink. I don't use anything. I don't get violent," she said evenly. "I don't trap people. And I don't let anyone else hold the key to where I sleep. I have no one else's key to this place," he said. "I don't bring anyone here. It's just me." She studied his hands as he worked the knife, watching the way he held it, how he placed each cut. "Medical? Last clinic check 2 months ago. Nothing flagged. Records are on my terminal. Paper copies too, if you prefer." "I prefer paper. I keep paper," he said. "Power goes out sometimes. Paper doesn't." She sat in the chair nearest the window, setting the towel on her lap like a napkin. The silk wrap clung to her legs, now starting to dry. As she adjusted the tie, Rodney noticed faint marks on her wrist's old damage, healed over. He looked once, then forced himself to look again, not out of curiosity, but to acknowledge what was there without turning it into pity. "I didn't ask your name again," he said, plating the rice. "I won't. If you want to tell me when you choose." She took the plate, nodded once. "Good." He set the fish between them, poured tea, and they ate without hurry. She chewed slowly, deliberately, glancing at him before taking a second piece of fish. It wasn't asking permission. It was a silent measure of shared space. "What do you do at the port?" she asked finally. "Manifest control," he said. "I make sure cargo lists match what's unloaded and what's sent out. Some days I inspect in person. Some days I just correct weights and codes. I keep errors from turning into fines." "You were trained for it." "I worked for a freight company before I came here. Pay was better there. Hours worse. This is quieter." She gave a short, humorless breath. "I was a dock runner. Legal papers. Until the foreman changed. Then suddenly, all hybrid workers had IDs from the wrong batch. Pending status until they checked. Pending means no pay. Pending means you stand in the rain until you're wanted for something else." Rodney felt the slow pressure of anger behind his eyes. "Do you have a case file?" "There's a box for forms," she said flatly. "Always locked. The man with the key is always on lunch. I can check the registry tomorrow. Search by foreman, ID, date of policy change. That's enough to find a trace." She met his eyes. "No taking without asking." "That includes using my name anywhere." "Agreed," he said, They finished the meal. He cleared the plates, giving her space to stand if she wished. She didn't. She stayed in the chair, listening to the rain against the sill. When she finally rose, she took the towel in hand. "Shower now," she said. "Fresh shirt on the chair?" He replied. "It'll be big on you. Fabric soft." She paused at the bathroom door. "Do not come in." "I won't." Water began to run. Rodney moved around the small apartment, folding damp towels, cracking the window wider, laying out printed clinic records on the table in case she wanted to see them later. When she emerged, hair damp and clean, wearing his shirt, she spotted the bundle of papers, broke the string, and scanned the first page. "You keep good paper," she said. "Keep what I need to prove a thing when someone doubts it." She tied the string again and set the bundle on the shelf, not returning it, but giving it a place. Then she moved to the open window, eyes closed, breathing in the night air. "Before we decide what happens next," she said softly, "we settle. Questions now." Rodney stood still. "Ask them." Her eyes opened, steady on him. "Why was I on that bench?" "Because rent is due. Because food costs money. Because my lawful work is on hold. Because I choose the man I stand beside." He understood then this was no chance meeting. And for the first time, he wondered if he had been the one under appraisal all along. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the air sharp with the scent of wet rope and rust from the harbor cranes. Rodney left early for the trade office. His thoughts narrowed to one purpose. The port's network of terminals hummed in the dim light as he logged in, fingers moving over the keys with deliberate care. He began with the foreman's ID she had mentioned the night before, pulling the audit logs for the date she'd given him. When the results appeared, he leaned back, jaw tightening. 43 workers had been flagged pending within a 48-hour window. Every single one of them had the hybrid designation in their species record. That wasn't random. It was a purge disguised as procedure. The reason code verification of identity markers. Suspected counterfeit was one he knew well. It was vague enough to stall pay indefinitely, to keep workers idle until they were desperate enough to accept whatever work came, however dangerous. Or underpaid. Rodney copied the file to a secure folder, then printed the full list on thin, recycled paper. The sheets curled slightly as they came out of the printer, warm to the touch. He folded them twice, tucked them into the inner pocket of his jacket, and logged out. Digital records could vanish with a keystroke. Paper endured. By midday, he had signed out on the excuse of correcting a backlog from home. The walk back felt shorter, his mind locked on the question of what she would want to do with the list. Act now? Hold it? Wait for the right moment? The apartment was warm when he stepped inside. Steam drifted from a pot on the stove. She stood at the counter, barefoot, sleeves rolled to her elbows, stirring a grain porridge spiced with something sharp and unfamiliar. She didn't turn when she spoke. "You came back before shift bell," she said. "I found what you wanted," Rodney replied. Shutting the door behind him, got her hand stilled on the spoon. "How many?" 43. "All flagged within 2 days. All hybrids." She turned then, eyes narrowing. "Reason code?" "Verification of identity markers. Suspected counterfeit." Her jaw tightened. "A stall tactic. They'll keep you in pending until they need cheap replacements for a hard shift. Then they clear you just long enough to fill the gap." He said. She set the spoon down with care, as if the control in the movement mattered. "Then it's not personal. It's policy. Which means we can predict it." Rodney stepped closer. "You want to do something with it." "I want to make sure this list doesn't end up in the wrong hands," she said. "Information like this, it's currency. A worker with proof of discrimination could trade it for a week's pay. But nothing would change. It would vanish. into someone's ledger as leverage in a deal we'd never see. Rodney considered her for a moment. What's your plan? First, I memorize the names. Then I decide who can hold a copy without selling it. She moved to the table, opening a small, battered notebook. One by one, she wrote the names in neat columns, marking some with dots, others with lines. Rodney set the folded list beside her, watching as she paused over certain entries, as if weighing the risk each person represented. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. Tell me about the foreman. Hera V 20 years on the docks. By the book when it suits him, blind when it doesn't. He hates losing control more than he hates losing money. If someone makes his numbers dirty in public, he'll scramble to fix it. She looked up at him, the faintest trace of calculation in her eyes. So if the right part of the list reached the right person, someone who needed these workers back, he'd have to act. Rodney nodded slowly. I might know someone. Not a crew boss, an inspector. Karn Halvik. He's here every few months. Hates incomplete records. Has enough pull to suspend a foreman's access to the hiring board. And he'd keep our names out of it? He doesn't care who found it. Only that it's clean data. She tapped the notebook once, as if sealing the decision. Then that's our way in. Rodney noticed it, then the pronoun. Our, not my, not yours. Something had shifted. She wasn't just surviving now. She was moving into the fight. The rest of the afternoon passed in the quiet rhythm of work. She wrote in her notebook, memorizing names. He made coffee, going through the day's cargo receipts. At one point, she stopped writing and studied him. Why are you doing this? She asked. Rodney didn't look up from the papers. Because I can. Because I've been staring at cargo lists for 12 years, making sure every number matches, while people like V. Cut lives out of the records. If I can correct this one thing, I should. Her gaze lingered on him for a moment longer. Most people here keep their heads down. I've kept mine down too long. She didn't smile, but something in her expression softened. She bent over the notebook again, the scratching of her pen joining the sound of gulls beyond the window. By evening, the plan was set. In 3 days, Karn would be in port. Rodney would meet him in the inspection office. She would stay hidden until it was done. The list would remain locked in Rodney's desk. In a drawer with a false bottom, she tested herself. When night came, she stood at the window, watching the harbor cranes move against the glow of the bay. 3 days, she said without looking at him. 3 days, he echoed. Neither of them said what they both knew, that those 3 days would decide whether she ever had to stand. On that bench again, the first morning of waiting began before dawn. Rodney woke to the faint scrape of movement in the kitchen, careful enough not to wake him, deliberate enough to suggest she wanted him to hear if he was already awake. He stayed in bed a moment, listening. Cabinet doors opening and closing with a soft click. Water running. The muted rhythm of a knife against a cutting board. When he stepped into the kitchen, Arya was barefoot at the counter, sleeves of his shirt rolled to her elbows, hair loosely tied back. She didn't turn immediately, just poured boiling water into 2 mugs. You keep the tea in 3 tins, she said, glancing at the shelves. The top one is better quality. You drink from the lower tin when you're alone. Rodney raised an eyebrow. You've been studying my kitchen. I've been studying you, she said simply, sliding 1 mug toward him. It tells me more than questions do. He sat. The tea was from the top shelf, smooth, strong, far better than what he drank most mornings. You don't serve this to just anyone, she said. I don't have just anyone here, he replied. That seemed to satisfy her. She took the chair opposite him and began eating the bread she'd sliced. The quiet between them felt different than it had 2 nights ago, less like 2 strangers measuring each other, More like two people finding a shared pace. After breakfast, Rodney pulled on his coat for the walk to the trade office. "If you go out," he said, "avoid the market strip. The wrong eyes work there. I'll be here when you get back," she said without looking up. He believed her until he reached the docks and realized how easily she could leave without warning. They thought followed him through his shift, through the endless columns of cargo codes and the hum of the port's comms. When he returned at midday, the smell of cooking met him at the door. She was at the stove again, working with an easy precision. Vegetables sautéing in oil, laced with something sharp and earthy. The table was set. Bread warmed in the oven. "Neighbors stopped by," she said as she plated the food. Rodney's spine stiffened. What did they want? One asked if you were renting the place. I told him no. The other brought fruit from a stall. I think he wanted to see who was here. And you told him? That I'm a friend. And that you don't rent rooms. She set the plate in front of him. Word will spread. It always does. I care if it makes you a target. If they think I'm here by choice, they're less likely to try anything. Control the story before someone else does. They ate in a quiet it felt deliberate, the sort that made space for thought. Afterward, she moved to the desk and ran her fingers lightly over the locked drawer where the list was hidden. Still here? Yes. Good. She didn't. Try to open it. The afternoon passed in a slow rhythm. Rodney worked through old cargo receipts while Arya paged through his paper logs, occasionally asking about obscure port codes. She handled the sheets with the same care she'd used with the list, as though paper had its own weight in her mind. Near dusk, a knock sounded. Both of them froze. "Who is it?" Rodney called. "It's Marin," came a woman's voice from 2 doors down. He opened the door just enough to see her mid-50s, holding a tin wrapped in cloth. Her eyes darted past him, lingering on Arya for a moment before she smiled. "Thought you could use something warm." Rodney accepted the tin with a quiet thank you. "Friend of yours?" Marin asked, nodding toward a RYA double quotes. "Yes," Rodney said. Flatly Marin gave a knowing smile. "Good to see company in here for once." She left without pressing further. Rodney closed the door and locked it. Words spreading faster than I thought. "That's not all bad," Arya said. "If people know I'm here, it's harder for me to disappear quietly. Makes men like your foreman nervous." They ate Marin's stew without much talk, the quiet stretching long enough for the harbor lights to flicker on outside. Arya stood by the window, arms folded, watching the cranes move in slow arcs through the mist. 2 more days, she said. 2 more, he confirmed. Her voice held a note he hadn't heard before, something close to anticipation. Not safety yet, but the pull of it within reach. For the first time, Rodney found himself thinking less about the bench in the rain and more about the moment. She might never have to stand there again. The second morning of waiting arrived wrapped in a heavy fog that dulled the harbor to a faint, glowing blur. From the window, the cranes were no more than black silhouettes fading into gray. Rodney woke to a soft scuff of movement near the front door. He sat up in bed and saw Arya crouched low, sliding a folded scrap of paper under the narrow gap between the door and the floor. "What are you doing?" he asked, voice rough from sleep. She straightened without alarm, checking if anyone's been by. "If the paper shifts, the door has been opened. It hasn't." She gave a small nod. "You've lived in places you could trust the locks. I haven't." Rodney pulled on. His shirt. "We're still 2 days out. Karn's schedule is solid. Inspection rotation won't change." "That doesn't mean others won't move first," she said. "If V noticed your early leave yesterday, he might start asking who you spoke to after shift. The wrong ear hears the right detail, and he'll protect himself before we can corner him." It wasn't paranoia. It was a map of risk, and he could. See, she'd drawn it in her head 100 times before. Breakfast was quick tea and bread, and afterward she stayed near the window, watching the lane below as he prepared to leave. He paused at the door. "You trust me enough to stay again?" She looked at him steadily. "I stay because I choose to, not because I trust you. Trust is earned over time." The bluntness didn't sting. He understood it. He nodded once and left for the trade office. The day dragged. He cleared cargo discrepancies, corrected shipment weights, but his mind kept circling back to the locked drawer at home. When he finally returned, Arya was sitting cross-legged on the floor, notebook open, names from the list spread into 2 columns. "I've sorted them," she said, looking up. "Those likely to speak up if reinstated. Those who will keep their heads down. You'll want to give Karn examples from both. It'll prove it's not an isolated issue." Rodney knelt beside her. "You've been thinking like an inspector." She met his gaze evenly. "I've been thinking like someone who's had to prove the same truth to deaf ears too many times." The rest of the afternoon passed in small, deliberate movements. She cleaned the counters with quick, efficient sweeps. He reviewed the week's cargo receipts. Neither spoke much, but there was an ease to the silence now. Just after dusk, a knock came. Both froze. "Who is it?" Rodney called. "It's Marin again," came the reply. He opened the door to find her holding a small loaf of bread, steam still rising from the cloth around it. But this time she lingered. Her eyes flicked from him to Arya, and her smile was slower. "You've got yourself settled, then," she said. Rodney kept his tone neutral. "We're fine here." Marin nodded once and left without another word. Rodney shut the door. "She's curious. They all are," Arya said. "And that's good. If they know I'm here, it's harder for me to vanish without notice." They ate in near silence. Later, as the harbor lights blinked through the fog, Arya stood at the window again. "Tomorrow is the last day before we move," she said. "You ready?" Her jaw tightened slightly. "I'm ready for whatever comes after. Whether we hand the list over or burn it, I'm not going back to that bench." "You won't," he said. She didn't answer right away. But when she turned to look at him, there was less distance in her eyes than there had been 3 nights ago. Not trust, not yet, but something moving toward it. The morning broke under a low, unbroken ceiling of fog. It wrapped the harbor and the streets in a pale shroud, muting sound until the gulls were only faint cries above the water. Rodney sat at the table, nursing a mug of tea, his eyes on the clock. Across from him, Arya sat with her jacket draped. Over the back of the chair, sleeves rolled, hair tied back. She was calm in a way that looked practiced, not natural, shoulders loose, posture even, gaze steady. "When we walk in," Rodney said, "Karn will have 2 clerks at the front. They'll log us and send me through. If they ask about you, I'll say you're a secondary witness. And if Karn doesn't like me being there, then I take the lead. You keep quiet until I tell you otherwise. The less you say, the less they can use against you later." Arya gave a short nod. "Clear." They left without lingering, taking the longer route that cut wide around the market strip. The cobblestones were slick from earlier drizzle, carrying the smell of salt and machine oil. She walked beside him with her gaze forward, scanning doorways and cross streets without drawing attention. The inspection office sat in a squat, functional building near the inner docks, a faded Union crest over the door, marking it as neutral. Ground. Inside, the lighting was flat and a touch too bright, the air dry with the faint tang of paper dust. The clerk at the front desk glanced up. "Stroud?" Rodney said. "Meeting Inspector Halvick. Appointment logged under port audit follow-up." The clerk checked the screen and nodded. "Second door on the right." They stepped in. Karn Helvik was behind a bare desk, tall and lean, hair clipped close to his scalp, the inspector's coat neat but not new. His eyes moved over Rodney, then paused on Arya. Didn't expect a second. "She's here as a witness to the pattern," Rodney said evenly. "If this goes where I think it will, her perspective matters." Karn leaned back. "Fine, let's see it." Rodney drew the folded papers from his jacket and set them on the desk. Karn opened them, his eyes moving line by line. His expression didn't shift, but a pen began to tap slowly against the wood. 43 pending in 48 hours, he said. All hybrids. Reason codes too vague to stick. Policy abuse, Rodney said. The systems being used to stall pay and cut the workforce without clearance. Karn kept reading. Where'd you pull this? Trade office logs. Search by foreman ID and audit date. For Harvey? Rodney nodded. Karn set the papers down. I can't reinstate all 43 on my own, but I can flag this as a breach in labor compliance. That forces a temporary lift on every pending case until the review completes. How long before it takes effect? Arya asked. Hours, Karn said. Once I file it, V's board lights up. He won't like it, but he can't block it without going over my head. And my head reports to the union. And our names? She pressed. I don't care who found it, Karn said. All that matters is the data's clean. Rodney met Arya's eyes. She gave a small, deliberate nod. Karn began typing, fingers quick, the pen now still beside the keys. Rodney and Arya stood silent, the sound of the keys the only measure of the moment's weight. When they stepped outside, the fog was thinning. Arya unbuttoned her jacket, her stride lighter. You think he'll do it? He will, Rodney said. You give Karn a dirty record. He'll clean it no matter who it hits. By the time they reached the apartment, she had stopped scanning doorways. Inside, she hung her jacket on the hook and turned to face him. It's done, she said. It's done, he echoed. She stepped closer, her hand pressing briefly against his chest. Then I'm not leaving tonight. The weight that had been riding his shoulders for days eased in a single breath. Good, he said. For a long moment, neither spoke. The harbor outside carried on with its work. For the first time since the bench in the rain, there was no next move to plan, no risk to calculate, only the steady presence of someone who had chosen to stay. The fog had lifted by the next morning, replaced by the bright, salt-washed air that only came after a night of rain. From the open window, the harbor stretched sharp and clear, cranes swinging slow against the pale sky. Rodney sat at the table with his tea cooling beside him, watching Arya move around the small apartment. She moved without hesitation, now taking bread from the cupboard, setting the kettle, without asking where things were. The quiet between them felt different, not the watchful silence of strangers, but something settled. Karn's action had rippled fast. Word had already reached the trade office. The pending status on dozens of hybrid workers had been lifted overnight. There'd be arguments, inquiries, paperwork snarls, but the blockade had broken. Rodney hadn't needed to check the list in the locked drawer this morning. Its job was done. Arya brought her mug to the table and sat across from him. She was barefoot, her hair loose, eyes sharper than her relaxed posture suggested. You should know something, she said after a sip. That night you stopped. I'd been on that bench 3 days. Not because the merchant put me there, but because I chose it. Rodney frowned. Chose it? I'd been watching you for over a week, she said. From the far side of the strip, from the shadow of the crane paths. You never looked away from the people others ignored. I needed to see if that was a habit or an accident. He leaned back slowly, the realization settling in. You put yourself in my path. Not for rescue, she said evenly. I've had rescuers. They hand you food and send you away, or they keep you like something they bought. I needed someone who'd step into a fight they didn't have to, and keep standing when it got ugly. Rodney let the words sink in, so I was the one being tested. Her mouth curved not a smile, but a faint acknowledgement. You passed. The kettle clicked softly on the counter. Outside, gulls wheeled over the docks, their calls sharp in the clear air. I can't fix the system, he said after a moment. No, she agreed. But you can keep the parts of it honest that you can. Reach, that's enough for me to stand beside. He thought of the drawer in his desk at the trade office, the manifests he corrected, the quiet work that had always felt like keeping the wheels turning without changing their course. Now it felt different, like the ledger he kept had more than just cargo and numbers in it. She reached across the table, her hand closing lightly over his. The bench is behind me. This place, she glanced around the apartment, the window, the kitchen, the narrow hall. It's not just yours. Anymore. Rodney didn't argue. He didn't need to. That evening, as the harbor lights came on and the cranes slowed to their night rhythm, Rodney took the folded list from the drawer. Together, they burned it in a shallow metal pan by the open window. The paper curled and blackened, the names, lifting in thin gray spirals into the night air. When the last ember dimmed, Arya turned from the window and crossed to him. No records, she said quietly, only memory. Memory holds, he replied. They stood in the dim lamplight, the harbor's hum all around them, each aware of the shift that had already taken place. Two people bound not by what had been bought or owed, but by a choice freely made and made again.